Story 1. I need to provide some very brief context so this story makes sense. I go to a public university in California. It's part of the UC system. Some UCs, like UCLA and Berkeley and Santa Barbara, are much bigger, while others like mine are much smaller. Most of the big ones have their own version of what's known as a dedicated tour day, where all the incoming students go to that respective campus to tour it. But really, it's just an excuse for all the current students to throw crazy all-day parties. Berkeley's is called Cal Day, and Santa Barbara's is called Deltopia, just to give a few examples. Now my campus is about a 2.5-hour drive from Santa Barbara, but it's sometimes customary for students from other campuses to make the drive to bigger schools for that one day. I've never really been one to party like that, so it was never something I did. But a few months ago, I realized it was my senior year and I'd never get the chance to go again. So when they asked me if I wanted to come with them to Santa Barbara's Deltopia, I decided to say screw it and just went. We drove down that Friday afternoon, the day before all the festivities. The car was completely packed out. Hunter was driving and the other friends joining us were Damon, Benjamin, and Armin. We're all above 6 feet tall, so the journey was painfully cramped, but it went by quickly with some good conversation and music. Once we got to Isla Vista, we spent the better part of an hour looking for parking with no luck. I'm not exaggerating about the parking situation. That's how popular Deltopia is. Just as we were about to give up, Hunter activated his charm and convinced a sorority girl to let us park in her designated spot. We all got a good chuckle out of that, so everything was going according to plan. Hunter's sister is a junior at UCSB, and she agreed to let us all crash on the floor of her apartment. That might sound a little ratchet to some, but during Deltopia, having a place to sleep is practically a golden ticket. Her and all of her roommates were super chill, so we decided to party with them that night, even though Deltopia technically didn't start until the next morning. There's one more thing I have to mention. Hunter is a really friendly guy, and because of that, a ton of people know him. He has this one friend named Amir, who's a little problematic. I'm using the word friend pretty generously here. Amir is one of those guys who clings to social circles without ever really being a part of them. He's insecure, loud, oblivious, constantly seeking validation, and somehow makes every conversation about himself. And before you call me out for gossiping, Amir has done a lot of messed up stuff to my friends and I in the past, so I've earned the right. Amir had mentioned to Hunter a while back that he was also going to Deltopia. There was never any real conversation about where he'd be staying or who he was going with. He wasn't part of our plan, and none of us had brought him up on the drive down. About an hour after the crew settled into Hunter's sister's place, we decided to make an alcohol run for ourselves and her roommates. As the 5 of us were leaving the liquor store with our purchases, who do we see but a mirror, just standing there on the curb with his hands in his pockets. No one said anything. We just kept walking towards the apartment, and he sort of fell in step with us, like he'd been there the entire time. The first thing out of Amir's mouth once we were a few blocks away from the store was, "Why are you guys so surprised to see me? Was this kid brain dead?" Of course we were surprised too. See him. There was never any plan to meet up with Amir, let alone hang out with him, and as far as any of us knew, Hunter hadn't even told him where we were staying. We all kind of ignored him and just kept walking, unsure of how this was going to play out. Things immediately escalated once we got back to the apartment. Amir asked if he could use the bathroom at our apartment and then ran ahead of us when Hunter reluctantly agreed. When Hunter's sister answered the door, Amir walked right up to her and said, "I'm staying here," before stepping past her without waiting for a response. She obviously didn't know who Amir was, but just assumed he was part of our group. When Hunter realized Amir had lied to his sister, he was livid. I could go into extreme detail about what happened first, but here's all you need to know. Hunter told him straight up he had to leave, that he wasn't welcome there, and that lying to his sister was crossing a line, Amir didn't go quietly. He stood outside the door for another 20 minutes, trying to argue his way back in. Hunter's not the guy you want to mess around with, so Amir eventually took the hint and left. We got wasted after that, and admittedly, Amir was all any of us could talk about. We realized later that night that Hunter had been sharing his iPhone location with Amir, meaning Amir had stalked us to the apartment. But anyway, the next day was a blast. Deltopia certainly lived up to the hype. Most of the shenanigans were done by late afternoon, so we met up with 5 of our other friends, and the 10 of us found ourselves chilling back at Hunter's sister's apartment. We filled the rest of the guys in about the Amir situation, and they found it just as odd as we did. One of our other friends, Rylan, said he was pretty sure he had Amir's location. He immediately checked it, and his jaw actually dropped. He turned the phone towards us, and I swear to God, the little blue dot was showing up basically on top of us. As soon as we mentioned it though, the dot started moving away quickly, like Amir had been spying on us from a car and was now driving away. It was bizarre. Him showing up a second time was borderline psychotic, especially after Hunter had explained to him why he wasn't welcome there. We probably should have taken the whole thing more seriously than we did. That behavior was extreme, even for Amir. Instead, we all just laughed about his weird obsessiveness and continued partying. That night, after we had all crashed, I woke up randomly sometime well after midnight. I barely had time to process my surroundings when I heard glass shattering from somewhere deeper in the apartment. I shot up off the floor, looking around to see if anyone else was awake. No one was, probably because everyone had gone to sleep, completely wasted. I realized pretty quickly that no one else had heard it, and if someone had broken in, I was the only one who could do anything about it. I didn't have a weapon or anything, so I just grabbed an empty wine bottle off the floor, took a deep breath, and started creeping toward the noise. My heart was pounding. When I entered the living room, I saw the sliding door that led to the balcony had been completely shattered. A huge rock sat in the middle of the floor, surrounded by glinting shards of glass. I didn't need convincing. I knew Amir was behind it. I went to go wake my friends up, when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a closet door handle jiggle a little. I froze, more scared than I had been just moments before. I didn't think Amir had the guts to go beyond destroying property, and the thought that he had broken into the apartment terrified me. I was just about to yank the closet door open when my better judgment forced me not to. Instead, I snuck back to the bedroom, woke Hunter up, and told him to back me up. The 2 of us walked towards the living room, but by the time we got there, the closet door was wide open. I looked around frantically, but I didn't see him. That's when Hunter reached into the closet and pulled out this massive kitchen knife. I stared in shock. Amir had literally been standing behind the door with a knife, probably intending to injure me. He could have literally ended my life had I opened that closet door. That was the most horrifying moment of my life. Hunter and I woke the rest of the house up, and we did a sweep to be 100% sure that Amir was nowhere in the apartment. We obviously got the police involved, but all that really came of that was just getting a police report. They told us property tends to get destroyed during Deltopia, and we were one of the many victims. Before you ask, Amir had stopped sharing his location with Rylan, so we couldn't even show the police that. We had to leave the next morning. Hunter was freaked out about leaving his sister and her roommates there, especially knowing that Amir had managed to sneak in there once already. Before we got in the car, he pulled out his phone and typed out this massive paragraph to Amir. I'm not going to air it out here, but you can guess what was said. The message never delivered though. Amir had already blocked him. We all pulled out our phones and realized we had all been blocked too. Over the next few weeks, none of us heard from him. It was like he had fallen off the map completely. I still can't wrap my head around all of this. As aggressive as Amir often pretends to be, he doesn't have a history of violence. In fact, I've always thought of him as a little passive. He knows where all of us live, so I'm still worried, even while writing this out, that he's gonna do something drastic. I'll send an update should something happen. My name is Arthi. This happened a pretty long time ago, but I'd say I still remember about 90% of the details vividly. It was late April 1996. I was fresh out of basic training, and I had just been assigned to an airbase as a communications specialist in San Angelo, Texas. Being stationed in Texas was great for me. I'm originally from Mississippi, and part of the reason I enlisted in the first place was to get as far away from home as possible. I was 24 years old at the time. My closest friends on base were a guy named Seabass and a girl named Kay. I've since lost touch with them, but back then, the three of us were inseparable. It was a warm weekend, sometime in early April, when Seabass proposed taking a road trip to Austin for the day to experience a change of scenery. Kay and I were also getting sick of the base life monotony, so we agreed. Kay offered to drive, so we packed our SUV with our stuff and hit the road that same afternoon. About an hour into the drive, we were on a mostly empty stretch of highway when Seabass spoke up. He asked us if we had seen the car behind us pull up from the shoulder right after we had passed. I looked back and saw a dark-colored Tahoe or something similar trailing us at a steady distance. I hadn't seen it pull off the shoulder, but being as we were on the highway, it wasn't exactly the weirdest thing. But then Kay changed lanes, just to see, and the SUV followed. She did it again a minute later. Again it mirrored her move. I was confused at first, but then, a minute later the SUV put its lights on and everything made sense. We were getting pulled over by an undercover cop. Kay pulled over and I watched as the cop pulled over behind us. I'm a pretty observant person. Processing information quickly is something I was quite literally trained to do, so I instantly realized something was off. The guy who stepped out didn't look like any cop I'd ever seen, wearing all black tactical gear, but nothing on him that said police. The only thing even remotely official looking about his uniform was a patch on his arm that said something I couldn't read. He didn't behave like a normal officer either. Instead of approaching Kay's window, he stood behind the car like he was waiting for something. I watched him a little while longer and realized he wasn't just standing behind the car, but was actively analyzing it. He was looking through the rear window like he was trying to see the stuff we packed. He was also checking out Kay's bumper stickers and her license plate. Seabass and Kay eventually caught on to the officer's strange behavior too, and Seabass rolled his window down before asking the officer if there was a problem. Instead of responding, the officer swiftly walked up to Kay's window and asked for her license and registration. Kay reluctantly gave it to him. He walked back to his vehicle and didn't return for a really long time. The Evas started whispering about how strange this whole encounter was getting, but we weren't sure what to do. After what felt like forever, the guy finally exited his car again, only this time, two other men stepped out with him. I could feel my heartbeat ticking up, so I did some focused breathing to keep calm. The original officer walked back, up to Kay's window, and asked her if her father was in the army or something. Kay asked for clarification, and the officer mentioned the US military bumper sticker on the back of her car. Kay laughed and said that she was the one in the military. Then turned to Seabass and I and said, "Them too." The moment Kay mentioned we were all in military, I noticed a shift. The guy at her window didn't say anything right away, but his body language stiffened. He glanced back at the other two men, who were still standing near the rear of the SUV, and then he glanced back at Kay. There was a weird silence for a second, and then he just told Kay that he was letting her off with a warning and to drive more slowly. He handed back Kay's license and turned around without another word. The three of them got back in the car, and before Kay could even start her engine, the Tahoe pulled off and sped away. Three of us were dumbfounded. Seabass couldn't stop talking about how those guys weren't real officers. They would have done something shady. Had we all been civilians? There really wasn't much more we could do, so Kay just got back on the highway. Austin was actually a really good time, and by the time we got back to base, we had all but forgotten about the stop. It wasn't until about a week later that I was reminded of it. I was sitting in the rec room watching the local news with Seeb when a story came on that made me freeze up. Apparently, a man and woman had been found dead in a ditch along a stretch of highway just outside of San Angelo. According to the reporter, the victims had been robbed and murdered, and investigators believe they were dumped there the night before. What really got me, though, was the next part. The vehicle found abandoned near the scene was a black Tahoe. Police confirmed it had been reported stolen months earlier, several states away. Sebas and I instantly went to find Kay, and the three of us agreed we had to tell the police about what we had seen. We told the police everything, and part of me felt a surge of guilt for not telling them sooner. Even to this day, I still think about how Kay's bumper sticker may have saved our lives that day. I can't help but think about how easily it could have been us in that ditch had we not been military. I've always been a really private person. That's part of the reason I've waited so long to put this story out there. I can't think of many worse things than this story getting traced back to me somehow. But I was recently thinking about how it would be a shame to leave this earth without circulating it. So here it goes. I just want people to know that I'm really stepping out of my comfort zone doing this. About 10 years ago, I was on a solo road trip from West Paterson, New Jersey, to Fort Worth, Texas. I was on the way to visit my parents, whom I hadn't seen in a while. I'd moved out of Fort Worth years earlier and hadn't been back much since, so this trip felt overdue. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, maybe Arkansas or the edge of Oklahoma, I can't really remember exactly. My car started acting up. I tried to ignore it for a while, but eventually I had no choice but to pull over. There wasn't much around, just trees, open field, and a long empty road behind me. I popped the hood and started poking around, pretending I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I was just sort of killing time, but I didn't want to admit that I was basically helpless. I figured I'd poke around for a bit, and once that failed, I'd call AAA. I didn't actually have AAA, so I was really pissed because I knew they'd charge me an arm and a leg. A few minutes later, though, I heard a car pulling up behind me. It was a nondescript, white pickup truck. I remembered noting to myself that it didn't have a front plate, or at least not one I could see. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. If I had to guess, I'd say he was in his mid-30s, maybe a little older, but worn down in a way that made him seem older than he probably was. He had curly hair and a long, uneven beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He seemed like the kind of guy you could tell worked with his hands a lot, if that makes any sense. He honestly kind of looked like an older version of me. Same build, same height, same hair color, just a bit less well-groomed than I am. He walked over slowly, giving my car a once-over as he approached. He didn't ask if I needed help so much as assume it. Before I even said anything, he was already leaning over the engine like he knew what he was doing. I spoke up and told him what happened, then thanked him for stopping to help me. He told me he was a mechanic, and based on how quickly he got to work, I didn't question it. I was already thinking about how I could repay him for the help when he said something that kind of surprised me. After a minute or two of fiddling, he stepped back and gave the engine a look that didn't exactly inspire confidence. He muttered something about needing a compression tester. Apparently, without it, the car wasn't going to start no matter what. Then he glanced over to his truck and said his friend, another mechanic, might be able to bring one over. I honestly had no idea what the part even was that he was talking about, but he seemed genuine, so I believed him. I thanked him again, and he pulled out his phone, presumably to call his buddy. He froze up for a few seconds while looking at his phone screen, and then put his phone back in his pocket, saying it was dead. He then asked if he could borrow mine to make the call. I didn't even think twice about it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and handed it to him without a second thought. He took it with one hand, And then, almost in the same motion, he reached into his jacket with the other and pulled out a gun. I instantly knew what was about to happen. He didn't say much, just told me to sit down on the shoulder and not try anything stupid. His voice didn't shake. He'd clearly done something like this before, or at least thought about it enough for it to seem practiced. I did what he said. The whole thing felt strangely calm, like we were both just going through something totally normal. He rifled through my pockets and took my wallet, my backpack from the passenger seat, and even had me show him the password to my phone. Then he drove off, and that was that. I had literally just been robbed on the side of the road. I know I'm speaking about it calmly now, but you best believe I was livid at the time. I don't think even now I've ever been more angry in my life. Unfortunately, there's more to this story, much more. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but someone eventually did stop and help me. After getting my car started, they were even nice enough to give me directions all the way to my parents so I could do it without my phone. I made it to Fort Worth later that night, and given the circumstances, my visit with my parents was actually really nice. The next few weeks were a blur of canceling cards, replacing IDs, updating passwords, and basically recovering everything I'd lost. It was annoying and time-consuming, but I eventually squared away as much as I possibly could and I got on with my life. Fast forward like 6 months, that's when things started to hit the fan. One day, I got a letter in the mail from some bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me, thanking me for opening a new line of credit. I figured it was a scam at first, or just some kind of junk mail. But then, another one came. This time from Best Buy, with a card I'd supposedly opened and already racked up over $1,000 on. The charges were all from a random town in Tennessee. At first I was more confused than anything, but that's when it hit me. I had forgotten, until that exact moment, that my social security card was likely in my wallet when I had gotten robbed. And now the guy who had robbed me had everything he needed to become me. The next month of my life was a living hell. My credit report was a mess. Hard inquiries, new cards, balances I didn't spend. It felt like every day there was something new. If any of you have dealt with identity thefts, you know how hopeless it can seem. I filed a report with the FTC, placed a fraud alert on all 3 credit bureaus, and even froze my credit. I went to the police and gave them everything I had, but without a name or a license plate. They apparently couldn't do a thing. I filed a formal report anyway, just to have a paper trail. I even called the local police departments in each of the towns where fraud had occurred, followed every step you're supposed to follow, but somehow it wasn't enough. Things kept escalating. Whoever was stealing my identity was being extremely cautious about it. A few weeks later, I got a call from my health insurance provider. Someone had received emergency care under my name at a hospital in Georgia. It wasn't just a billing issue. There were now records in my file that didn't belong to me. Stuff that could actually screw me over if I ever landed in the hospital and couldn't speak for myself. I obviously reported everything to the police, again, but that was the last straw for me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. From then on, I transformed my whole lifestyle and spent every ounce of my free time trying to track down the perpetrator myself. I set up Google alerts for my name and any recent cities tied to the fraud. I checked my credit report constantly. I scanned forums and dug through social media. I did everything I could think of. One night on a whim, I decided to start checking Craigslist. I focused on cities tied to the fraud, places where chargers had shown up from or mail had come from. After looking around for a while, something caught my eye. It was a posting from Jackson, Tennessee. The listing was for a bunch of used power tools and some other miscellaneous items. I wasn't sure why it stood out to me so much, but the longer I looked, the more familiar it seemed, and then it clicked. Everything listed matched up perfectly with some of the things that had been charged to that Best Buy card. I sat there for a while, unsure what to do. Eventually, I responded to the listing, saying I was interested in a couple of the items and asked if they were still available. I debated trying to attach a tracker link or something clever, but I didn't want to spook whoever it was. If it was him, and he got even a hint that someone was onto him, he'd vanished. So I kept it simple. To my surprise, it didn't seem like the guy was onto me at all. After exchanging some emails over the next few days, he gave me a time and a public place to meet, and he told me to bring cash. The meeting was supposed to be the next day. I debated driving all the way to Tennessee myself, but I couldn't bring myself to. There's no telling what I would have done to that guy had I seen him in person a second time. So instead, I called the police department in Jackson to see if they remembered my case. They did, and I basically pleaded with them to help me out. I gave them everything I had and damn near prayed. By some miracle, they told me the details lined up just well enough for it to be worthwhile. They said they'd at least talk to him and see if there was any information they could get out of him. The next day, after a little back and forth, I got the guy to tell me he was driving a red pickup truck. I communicated that with the police and waited. After legitimately several hours, they called me. When they told me what had happened, I wanted to drop on my knees. I swear on my life. The officer told me that as soon as the guy spotted the patrol cars near the meet spot, he immediately sped out of the lot. He didn't even try to play it cool. That alone was enough to raise red flags, so they followed him. Not long after, the guy ended up losing control of his truck and crashing into a ditch. It wasn't a major accident, but it was enough to get officers legally involved, beyond just a casual questioning. According to them, was a total wreck, visibly shaken, panicking, talking in circles. You get it. As soon as they even mentioned the Best Buy items, he folded. He admitted he didn't know where the stuff had come from, that it wasn't his, and that a friend had given it to him, and he had independently decided to resell it. It could not have been more perfect. The guy ratted out his friend, and with his cooperation, the police were able to acquire enough evidence to arrest the real Never felt more relief in my life. Like I said earlier, I'm not trying to have this traced back to me, so I'm going to keep things vague from here on out. I will say this much though, the guy who robbed me wasn't acting alone. Turns out, there were 3 of them total. The craziest part is that I wasn't the only victim. From what I was told, they had been targeting travelers and isolated drivers up and down a few different interstate corridors, mostly in the south. Eventually, all 3 of them were caught, charged, and put in jail. I'm not going to say much more than that, but what I will say is justice was served. I'm Ashley, and I've been living the van life full-time since the fall of 2022. I left behind a cramped apartment in Phoenix, packed my gear, and turned my converted Sprinter into a rolling home. Most of my days are spent exploring scenic byways, writing for my travel blog, and chasing that perfect golden hour shot. I don't really stay in cities anymore. Too loud, too crowded. I prefer lonely campgrounds, forgotten highways, and sleepy little towns that look like time forgot them. That kind of quiet always felt safe to me, until that night outside rural Oklahoma changed everything I thought I knew about being alone on the road. It was mid-April, and I was somewhere southeast of Norman trying to get to a free camping spot I'd bookmarked. Cell signal was trash, and my GPS started acting like it had early dementia, rerouting me, freezing, spinning. I wasn't too worried. I'd been in plenty of dead zones and knew how to read road signs when needed. Eventually I took what I thought was the right turn down an unpaved service road, barely a road, more like 2 dirt tracks cut through tall grass and red clay. The sun was setting, and I figured I'd make camp early. It felt calm, untouched, a little eerie in that backwoods kind of way. But not 10 minutes in, I started hearing this weird crunching under my tires. At first I assumed it was branches or gravel. The road wasn't exactly maintained. but it kept happening. Too often, too loud. And then I noticed something even stranger. There were no animals, no birds, not even bugs. Just this unnatural silence broken only by the occasional snap under the wheels. I slowed down and rolled, my window down, sticking my head out to try and spot what I was running over. That's when I saw the first one, something pale and limp, maybe the size of a cat, lying dead in the middle of the path. I stopped the van, threw on my headlamp, and stepped out with a flashlight in hand. I expected to find a possum, or maybe some roadkill dragged there by scavengers. But the more I walked, the more I saw. Dozens of small animals, most of them rabbits and raccoons. Each one freshly dead, blood still glistening. And they weren't just there. They were arranged, spaced in disturbing, intentional patterns across the road, like a trail of breadcrumbs left by someone who wasn't expecting visitors. Some were in circles, others in spirals. One rabbit had its limbs stretched out and pinned down by sticks, like a grotesque compass pointing toward the trees. The air was thick with the sharp sting of blood and something older, like wet soil and rusted metal. I felt this cold ripple crawl down my spine, like my body knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I kept telling myself maybe it was just some deranged hunter or a messed up prank, but deep down, I knew this wasn't a joke. There was a heaviness to it, something ritualistic. I turned slowly in place, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. That's when I noticed shapes, tied together bones, hanging from branches like wind chimes, swaying gently even though there was no breeze. I didn't see anyone, but I started to get that awful magnetic feeling like I was being watched. My skin prickled. I backed away toward the van, careful not to step on anything, heart hammering in my ears. I slammed the door shut and locked everything, hands shaking, too freaked out to even start the engine right away. I just sat there gripping the wheel, staring into the high beams that lit up the twisted mess ahead of me. Something about the way those animal bodies were placed, it felt like a warning, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I remember whispering, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular before finally starting the engine and throwing it in reverse. I didn't care about scratching the van on branches or tearing up the bumper. I needed to get out of there. The road was too narrow to turn around, so I had to back up for what felt like miles. My rear camera was useless in the dark, and every time I checked my mirrors, I half expected to see someone standing behind me. I didn't relax even after I hit pavement again. I just kept driving, didn't even know where I was going, just away. I found an old gas station that looked like it had been abandoned years ago, parked under one of the rusted out lights, and sat there for over an hour, trying to convince myself it hadn't been as bad as I remembered. I even thought about going back to photograph it for the blog, but something in me said, don't. The next morning, I called the local sheriff's department. I wasn't even sure how to explain what I saw. I just told them I found animal remains arranged in strange patterns off a dirt road near State Highway 9. The woman on the phone got quiet, asked a few specific questions, and then told me someone would call me back. A deputy named Carter rang me later that afternoon. He wasn't surprised, just resigned. He said this wasn't the first time someone had reported something like that out there. Apparently over the past few months, they'd had a few similar calls. He didn't say the word cult, but he did mention local groups and possible illegal activity. I asked if it was satanic stuff. He just sighed and said, "Ma'am, I'd advise you not to go back out there." I deleted the location from my map history. That night, even though I'd marked it as a saved camp spot, I wanted no trace of it in my phone. No breadcrumb trail in case I got the wild idea to go back. And yet for days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept seeing those circles of animals every time I closed my eyes. How clean the kills looked. How deliberate the spacing was. It didn't feel random. It felt like I had interrupted something. Or worse, that whatever was meant to show up hadn't arrived yet. And I had gotten out just in time. A week later, While stopped in Arkansas, I met another solo traveler at a laundromat. She was maybe 10 years older than me, lived full-time, in a school bus, and we got to talking about strange places we'd camped. When I told her about Oklahoma, she froze, like visibly froze, and asked if the animals were arranged in patterns. I nodded slowly. She told me she'd seen the same thing over a year ago, near a completely different part of Oklahoma. Her story matched mine too well to be a coincidence, and just like me, she left and never looked back. That was the first time I realized this wasn't an isolated thing. Since then, I've heard little bits here and there from other van lifers. You learn to listen for the coded language. People don't outright say ritual or sacrifice, but they'll mention bad energy or off-limits woods. Every once in a while, someone posts about strange symbols carved into tree trunks or abandoned shacks deep in the forest with markings on the walls. The weird part is, those posts never stay up for long. They get deleted or the accounts go silent. Makes you wonder who else is paying attention. I still live on the road. It's my life, but I stay far away from rural Oklahoma now. I trust my gut more than I ever did before. I've learned that the silence in nature isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's warning you. I don't know what I stumbled into that night, and honestly, I don't need to. All I know is, whatever was supposed to happen out there, it wasn't meant for anyone to witness, and I was lucky enough to leave while I still could. I've been hauling freight for a little over 17 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and this solitude suits me most days. My name's Mike. I'm 44, based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I usually run long-haul routes up and down the East Coast, and that night I was heading south, through central Maryland, hauling a half-loaded trailer of industrial filters. It was early spring. I remember that well. Chilly, but not freezing, and the kind of fog that clings low to the road like it's waiting to trap you in it. I just stopped for bad coffee at a gas station near Route 50 when I saw her. A girl, maybe 16 or 17, standing on the shoulder under one of those dim orange floodlights. Hugging herself like her own skin didn't feel safe. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who picks up hitchhikers. That rule's kept me out of trouble more than once, but something about her didn't sit right with me. She wasn't trying to wave anyone down or even make eye contact. Just standing there, shaking, like the road was the last place she wanted to be, but still better than wherever she came from. I rolled past her at first, slow enough to really see her through the side mirror. Dirty sneakers, ripped hoodie, blonde hair matted and uneven like someone had chopped at it with scissors in the dark. I swear to God, something in my gut twisted. I pulled over about 200 yards down, hands on the wheel for a few seconds before I threw it into reverse. She climbed in without a word. I asked her where she was headed and she just shrugged and said, "South." That was it. One word. I tried to make light conversation, told her my name was Mike, offered her a bottle of water, asked if she had family she could call. She didn't answer most of it, just kept fiddling with the frayed drawstring on her hoodie and staring out the window like she was counting the trees. I noticed she had a scab on her cheekbone and a cut across her knuckles that looked fresh. I didn't push, but man, the silence in that cab got heavy real fast. I turned the radio on low, just enough to fill the space. We'd been driving maybe 20 minutes when I saw flashing lights up ahead. A roadblock, out in the middle of nowhere. Cops waving drivers over one by one, checking IDs. Weird time and place for that kind of thing. But I wasn't carrying anything illegal, and my logbook was clean. Still, Katie, that's what she finally told me her name was, stiffened the second she saw the lights. I mean full-on panic. Her breathing changed, fast and shallow, and she kept whispering, "Please don't let them take me back," over and over, like it was a prayer. I told her to calm down, that it was probably just a routine check. She didn't respond, just looked at me, eyes glossy with tears. and that's when I noticed the bruises peeking out from under her sleeve. When the officer knocked on my door, I rolled the window down and did my best to stay casual. He was young, probably no older than 30, with that tight-clipped way of speaking that told me he wasn't in the mood for small talk. "Evening, sir. Just a quick check. Mind telling me where you're headed?" I gave him my route and showed my ID. But then his flashlight swept across the cab, and the beam landed on Katie. She flinched like it burned. The cop leaned down, narrowing his eyes. "Miss, you okay?" She didn't answer. Just looked straight ahead like he wasn't even there. That was enough. He opened the door, asked her to step out. When she hesitated, 2 more officers were already approaching from the rear. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get out and defend her, tell them she hadn't done anything wrong, that she looked scared before they even showed up. But the other part, the part that's been burned by good intentions before, stayed put. I watched as they led her to the side of the road, and one of them gently pulled her sleeve up. That's when I saw the full extent of it. Bruises in different shades and sizes, climbing up her arm like fingerprints frozen in time. She didn't scream or cry. She just whispered something to one of the officers, and I saw his expression shift from procedure to something like sorrow. She pointed back at me, and for a split second, I thought she was about to say, "I hurt her." Instead, she said, "Please, don't make me go back. He's worse than before." Her voice cracked on the word, worse. I'll never forget how small she sounded. One of the cops looked back at me, not accusing, more like he was asking a silent question. "Did you know?" I shook my head. Honest truth, I didn't know the half of it. They put her in the back of a cruiser, and that was it. No explanations. One of the officers came over, said she was reported missing from a foster placement, and they'd been looking for her all night. I asked if she'd be safe. He didn't answer. That just thanked me for cooperating and waved me on. I drove in silence for the next 100 miles. Didn't even notice the radio had cut out into static. Her voice, that trembling, desperate, "Don't make me go back," just kept looping in my head. I thought maybe I should have fought harder, spoken up, insisted on staying with her until someone promised to help. But the thing is, I didn't know what my place was in that moment. I was just a trucker with a stranger in my cab, and maybe that's the part that eats at me the most. I could have done more, or maybe I couldn't. Either way, I didn't. And that choice became a weight I still haven't put down. A couple weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I ended up calling a friend of mine who used to work in child services, not to break any laws or anything, just to ask a few general questions. I didn't give her name, just described the situation. He got quiet, said, "Mike, if it was Route 50 and that weekend, I know exactly who you're talking about. Her name's Katie. She's been in and out of homes since she was 9. This last one, people have made complaints, but nothing's ever stuck." That hit me like a gut punch. I asked if she was safe now, and he hesitated. Then he said something I'll never forget. They sent her back, said there wasn't enough evidence to hold her. I hung up the phone and just sat there. I remember the light in my kitchen flickering, the hum of the fridge, the cold air through the cracked window. All normal things, but I felt like I wasn't in my body. That girl begged me not to let them take her, and I did nothing. I started seeing her in places she wasn't. A glance in the mirror, a flash of blonde outside a rest stop. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I'd heard her voice. I even stopped offering rides entirely after that. Not out of fear, out of guilt. Like I didn't deserve the trust. I still don't know what the right thing would have been. I've replayed that night 100 times, thinking about what I could have said, what I should have done when she first got in. Maybe I should have taken her straight to a hospital or a police station myself. But would that have changed anything? Or would they have just sent her back even faster? All I know is she was running for a reason, and I gave her hope. A tiny flicker, and watched it get ripped out of her hands. That doesn't leave you. It stays quiet, heavy, So yeah, if you're reading this and you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, don't assume someone else will do the right thing. Don't freeze. Don't let silence be your answer. I don't know where Katie is now. I hope she ran again. I hope she's somewhere safe. But I'll be honest with you. Every time I pass that stretch of road, I look at the shoulder. Half of me prays I won't see her. The other half hopes I will. I don't usually share personal stuff online, but I've been replaying this night in my head nonstop for weeks now, and I guess I just need to let it out somewhere. This happened to me about 2 months ago, mid-February. I work late night shifts at a small diner just outside Bakersfield, California, the kind of place that still uses paper, order tickets, and smells like burnt coffee and bacon grease. That night, I had picked up an extra shift, so I didn't clock out until well past midnight. I was already exhausted, greasy from the fryer, and honestly just craving a hot shower and my bed. The drive home is usually quiet, empty, highway, pitch black, no streetlights, just miles of nothing between the diner and the edge of town where I live. My car, a beat-up 2011 Toyota Corolla, had been giving me trouble for weeks. The battery light kept blinking, but I kept ignoring it, telling myself I'd deal with it on my next day off. Big mistake. About 20 minutes into the drive, right when I was on one of the more isolated stretches of the 46, my dashboard lit up like a damn Christmas tree, and then the engine cut out completely. I coasted to the shoulder and sat there in the silence, staring at my dead car like it might fix itself if I just waited long enough. No such luck. I grabbed my phone, but of course, no service. Just one tiny sliver of a bar, flickering in and out. I remember checking the time. It was 1:13 a.m. At first I wasn't scared, just annoyed and tired. I turned on my hazards, killed the engine, and started thinking about who I could call, or how long I'd have to wait until my phone picked up a signal strong enough to reach roadside assistance. That's when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. A truck, an older, loud, rumbling pickup, pulling up behind me. My first thought was that maybe it was a good Samaritan. Maybe someone heading home from a late shift like me. But as the truck idled behind me, the engine still running, and the driver didn't get out, my stomach started doing this slow, cold twist. Something about how long he sat there just watching made me reach over and quietly lock all my doors. Eventually, the driver's side door of the truck creaked open, and an older man stepped out. He had this long gray beard and was wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans, the kind that looked stiff from dirt and sweat. He walked slowly up to my window, and I cracked it only a few inches. He smiled, too wide, and said, "Car trouble, sweetheart. I can take a look under the hood for you." I told him I was fine. That help was already on the way. It was a lie, but I said it as confidently as I could. He kept smiling, didn't budge, just stood there with his hand on my side mirror, tapping it with his thumb like he was trying to decide something. That's when I felt it, like something cold and electric shot down my spine. This wasn't someone trying to help. I told him again, firmer this time, that I didn't need help, and that my boyfriend was already on his way. Another lie. I didn't even have a boyfriend at the time, but I thought maybe it'd make him think twice. He just laughed low and gravely, like I'd told him a joke. "Out here," he said, glancing around the pitch-black highway. "Ain't nobody coming for a while, sweetheart. I'll take care of you." Then, without waiting for a response, he stepped away from my window and started circling my car. Slowly, he dragged his fingers across the trunk as he walked, like he was inspecting it. I kept my eyes on him through the rearview mirror, trying to stay calm, but my hands were already shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I opened the Maps app just to get anything to load, hoping maybe I could send my location to someone, anyone, but it kept freezing, so I did the only thing I could think of. I dialed 911 and prayed it would go through. The first time, the Call failed. My heart dropped. I could hear him whistling now, somewhere behind the car. Just this tuneless, eerie melody that didn't stop. The second time, the call connected. I could barely hear the dispatcher through the static, but I just kept saying, "I'm on the 46 near Bakersfield. My car broke down. A man is trying to get into my car. I don't even know if they heard me clearly, but the dispatcher kept telling me to stay on the line and stay in the car." I ducked down in my seat, hiding below the window. The truck's headlights suddenly turned off. Everything went dark. I couldn't see him anymore, just shapes and shadows in the rear view. Then I heard a thud, soft but close. Then another, louder this time. He was trying the handles, first the back door, then the passenger side. I could hear him jiggling them, then pressing his weight against the frame. I remember holding my breath so tight my ribs hurt. My doors were locked, thank God, but I started to realize how thin those windows were. How if he really wanted to get in, he probably could. I reached down and hit the horn once, long and loud. The sound ripped through the silence and echoed off the empty highway. That seemed to spook him a bit. He backed off, but only for a second. Then, just as quickly as he'd appeared, he walked back to his truck and drove forward, slowly, not away, but past me. He stopped maybe 30 feet ahead, just sitting there with his brake lights glowing red in the dark. That's when I saw his reverse lights blink on. My heart just dropped. He started backing up, slow and steady, heading toward my car like he was going to pin me in or block me completely. I was frozen, no clue what to do, until out of nowhere, blue and red lights lit up the sky behind me. A CHP cruiser pulled up, siren blaring. The man's truck peeled off instantly, speeding down the highway like he'd been lit on fire. I just broke down crying as the officer came to my window. I didn't even know I was crying until I felt how wet my shirt was. The officer, his name was Deputy Ramirez, I'll never forget that, knelt beside my window and asked if I was hurt. I just shook my head and kept trying to breathe. My voice barely came out when I tried to talk. He radioed something in, then opened my door and stayed beside me until I could get my legs to work again. Another unit showed up not long after, and they got my statement right there on the shoulder of the road. I told them everything, what the man looked like, what he said, how he circled my car. I expected them to tell me they couldn't do much without a plate number, but instead, one of the officers looked at the other and said, "Sounds like him again." That sent a whole new chill through me. Turns out they had been receiving similar reports in that stretch of highway, late-night breakdowns, women approached by a man in an old pickup offering help that quickly turned threatening, but they'd never gotten there in time to catch him in the act. This time they did. After checking nearby traffic cams and putting out an alert, they managed to pull him over less than 20 minutes later. They brought him in and confirmed his identity. He was a registered sex offender with a prior record for assaulting women he found stranded on roads just like I was. The officer told me, point blank, that I had been incredibly lucky. If I hadn't managed to get that 911 call through, who knows? I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at my window. I didn't want to drive anymore, especially not alone. My brother ended up lending me his truck for a while, and I only drove during daylight for weeks. I also finally took my car in and had everything fixed. Battery, engine, the works. I even signed up for a roadside assistance program with GPS tracking, just in case. People say, trust your gut, like it's a throwaway line, but I swear it saved my life. The second I saw that man smile, I knew something was wrong. I'll never ignore that feeling again. I still drive past that same stretch of road sometimes, and every time I do, I get this weird tightness in my chest, like the air's heavier there. It sounds dramatic, I know, but something about that highway just feels off now, like it carries that memory in its pavement. I don't know what would have happened if those cops hadn't shown up when they did, and I try not to spiral thinking about it. But I guess that's why I'm writing this. To tell someone, anyone, that this stuff is real. It happens. And sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. Sometimes it's just a man with too much time and bad intentions, finding you when you're most vulnerable. That's what keeps me up some nights. I've been a delivery driver around the Lake Tahoe area for almost 12 years now. People think it's all scenic views and snow globe mornings. And yeah, sometimes it is. But when you know these roads like I do, you also know how unforgiving they can be. This happened back in late January of last year. I remember because I'd just come back to work after taking a few days off for the flu, and I was still feeling kind of off. That morning started like any other. I left the depot around 6:15 a.m., thermos of burnt gas station coffee in one hand, route printout in the other, scraping frost off the windshield with the sleeve of my jacket because I'd forgotten my scraper at home again. It was stupid cold, but the sky was clear, and I thought it would be just another day of weaving through mountain roads, dropping off packages to half-asleep people in cozy cabins. I was driving an older Ford Transit that morning, one of the heavier ones. We don't usually take up steep passes unless we have to. But the newer van had a battery issue, so I rolled with what I had. My route took me north along Route 431, a 2-lane mountain road that cuts through the forest with cliffs on one side, and guardrails that are more psychological than practical. I'd taken that route hundreds of times. It has a few sharp turns and blind spots, but if you go slow and keep your wits, you're fine. That morning, though, something felt off. The road looked dry, but there was this strange glitter on the pavement, like powdered glass catching the light. I slowed down out of habit. I've learned not to trust roads that sparkle in January. Somewhere around the 7-mile mark, there's this downhill curve where the trees thin out, and you get this stunning view of the valley. Locals call it Devil's Bend, mostly as a joke, but it's where the wind picks up, and the shadows from the trees make it hard to see the asphalt clearly. I was doing about 25 met pliers when the van suddenly jerked sideways. No warning, no skidding sound, just this sickening shift, like the ground itself had tilted. The back tires had hit a sheet of black ice. I remember gripping the wheels so hard my knuckles popped. I tried to steer into it, to regain control, but the van kept sliding, and the edge of the road was rushing up way too fast. I wish I could explain what went through my mind in that moment, but honestly, it all collapsed into one long, oh shit, that echoed in my skull. Time slowed like people say it does. I saw everything. The blur of trees, the gap in the guardrail, the white frost on the branches, even a squirrel frozen in place on the snowbank, watching me die. The van spun halfway, then dropped sideways, toward the edge. But instead of tumbling over, it slammed into something with a bone-rattling crunch. The whole left side leaned out into nothingness. I sat frozen in place, seatbelt cutting into my chest, engine still humming, tires still, spinning slowly in the air. When I looked to my left, all I could see were treetops below. No road, no ground, just empty air. For a few seconds, I genuinely couldn't move. I just sat there, hands welded to the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the windshield, while my brain tried to catch up with what had just happened. Then the reality hit me. I wasn't dead, but I wasn't safe either. The van was tilted hard to the left, the front passenger side wheel dangling in open air. The only thing keeping me from dropping into the canyon below were a cluster of pine trees that the van had somehow wedged into. I remember hearing the creak of metal and the occasional crunch of bark as the weight shifted. It wasn't stable. If I moved wrong, if the wind picked up, if anything gave way, that was it. I reached for my phone, but of course, no service. That stretch of road always had spotty reception, and I was far from any of the cabins I usually delivered to. For a second, I thought about climbing out through the driver's side, but the idea of putting any weight on that side made my stomach twist. I didn't even want to breathe too hard, so I stayed still. I turned off the engine, hoping that would reduce vibration. The silence that followed was unbearable, just the ticking of the cooling engine, the occasional gust of wind, and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Every couple of minutes, I'd hear the faint crackle of snow falling off a branch somewhere. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then came this weird sound, like a low groan, deep and hollow. It wasn't the van, it was outside. For a second, I thought maybe a tree was shifting under the weight, but then I heard it again, this time a little closer, and it sounded almost deliberate, like someone exhaling. I leaned forward, trying not to shift too much weight, and glanced through the frosted side mirror. Nothing, just trees. I told myself it was wind. It had to be, but my skin broke out in goosebumps anyway, and I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. I know that sounds paranoid, but something about that noise felt too steady, too aware. About 20 minutes in, a truck passed by, an old snowplow. I flashed my headlights and laid on the horn, but I guess from his angle, I was invisible. Or maybe he just thought I was parked. Either way, he didn't stop. That was the moment it really hit me. I could be stuck here for hours. If the ice shifted, if those trees gave out, nobody would even see me fall. I started thinking about everything I hadn't done, calling my sister back, fixing the sink at home, telling my niece I was proud of her for getting into college. Isn't it weird the things your brain clings to when it thinks it's running out of time? I sat like that for over an hour. The cold started seeping into my bones, even through my jacket. My toes went numb first, then my fingers. Every so often, the van would creak or shift slightly, and I'd freeze, too scared to even breathe. I didn't cry or panic, not in the way you'd expect. It was more like this quiet, heavy dread settling into me, like I was already mourning myself. I thought about my mom, who passed away 5 years ago, and wondered if I'd see her again. Then I thought about how dumb it was that something so routine, just another delivery run, could end like this. One wrong turn, one patch of invisible ice, and that's it. Eventually, I saw a flash of movement through the side mirror. A state trooper SUV creeping up the road with its lights on. I've never felt relief like that in my life. I wanted to scream out, but I didn't want to jolt the van, so I waved my hand carefully against the glass. The officer must have seen it, because the SUV stopped, and a guy in a bright orange jacket stepped out with a radio. I'll never forget his face, pale, wide-eyed, and genuinely concerned. They called in a rescue crew, blocked off the road, and used ropes and harnesses to stabilize the van before getting me out. It took almost 2 hours total, and every second of it felt like being suspended between two worlds. When they finally pulled me out through the driver's side, I collapsed into the snow and just laid there, staring up at the sky. Everything looked different, brighter, sharper, like I'd been given new eyes. One of the EMTs wrapped me in a silver thermal blanket and asked if I was okay. I just nodded, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. I kept thinking about how close I'd been to disappearing, how icily my van could have gone unnoticed. If it had dropped out of sight, no explosion, no big scene, just gone. That thought has stuck with me ever since. They towed the van out the next morning. It had bent one of the tree trunks completely sideways and left deep scars in the bark. The cop said if I'd been going even 5 miles faster, I would have gone straight over. I took 2 weeks off after that. When I finally got back behind the wheel, I couldn't drive that route anymore, not alone. Something about Devil's Bend still gets under my skin. Sometimes when I think back to that morning, I wonder what exactly I heard in those woods. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe something out there saw me and decided to let me live. I don't really know where to begin, but I've reached a point where I can't keep this bottled up anymore. My name is Sarah Turner. I was 27 when this happened, back in July of 2019. At the time, I lived in Denver, worked as a freelance photographer, and spent most weekends either on the road or hiking into some place cell towers forgot. Mark and Tim were childhood friends, goofy, loyal, always arguing about music. And Hannah was my best friend since college. We were tight. That summer, we decided to take one of those bucket list cross-country road trips. Denver to Portland, straight through the guts of the country, camping out along the way. It was supposed to be epic, and it was just not in the way we ever imagined. The plan was simple. 5 stops, 10 days, all crammed into Mark's old black Subaru Outback. We packed everything. Tents, cameras, snacks, hiking gear, way too many energy drinks. We even made a Spotify playlist called Mile Markers and Ghost Towns. The second leg of the trip brought us through Idaho. We didn't have a set campground in mind, but Tim had read about this off-grid site near a place called Dry Creek. Not even on Google Maps, but a ranger blog mentioned it had views worth dying for. That phrase feels sick now looking back. The town we stopped in beforehand was small, like one gas station, no stoplights, people watching you from their porch, kind of small. I don't even remember the name, but I remember the silence. It was the kind of place that felt paused in time. We filled up the tank, grabbed sandwiches from a sad little diner, and asked the girl at the register if she'd heard of Dry Creek. She hesitated for a second, just enough for me to notice, then said, "Sure, people go up there. Just make sure you're out before dark." Mark laughed it off, but the way she said it stuck with me. Not a warning exactly, just flat, like she'd said it before. When we pulled out of town, the road turned to gravel fast, then to nothing but dirt and pine needles. No signs, no cell signal, just the crunch of tires and the shadows growing longer. We finally found the campground, if you could even call it that. Just a clearing surrounded by trees that looked a little too tall, too still, but it was beautiful in that forgotten, eerie kind of way. That night felt off from the start. We set up our tents and cooked hot dogs over a fire that took way too long to light. The wood felt damp, even though it hadn't rained in days. Around midnight, the wind picked up out of nowhere, but only in bursts. Like someone was walking through the woods just outside our line of sight. I remember hearing something, like a whistle, but not really. Almost like someone trying to mimic one and failing. Hannah thought it was an owl, but I've heard owls. This wasn't that. We brushed it off, blamed the altitude or the beer, or just being tired. But none of us really slept that night. The air felt wrong, heavy, and then things got worse. The next morning, I was the first to wake up. It was still early. The sky was pale and hazy, not quite sunrise. I stepped out of the tent and immediately felt like I was being watched. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't just paranoia. It was something in the air, like the trees.